All right, we're going to get started shortly. Before we begin, I have a few quick housekeeping notes for you. We will have a few minutes at the end of the webinar for Q&A, so feel free to submit your questions into the Q&A box, either during the webinar or you can save them for the end. You will all receive a recording of today's webinar in your email following the webinar. And if you want to request a certificate of attendance, we'll share the request form at the end of the webinar, as well as in the follow-up email with the recording. We also have automatic closed captions enabled. If you'd like to turn it on in your screen, it should be available right on the bottom center of your screen. And at the end of today's webinar, we'll invite you to fill out our feedback survey so we know what we're doing right, and how we can improve for next time. All right, wonderful. Welcome to all of you. This is the Power of Play, Building Student Engagement, Achievement, and Critical Thinking. It's part of the Science of Learning webinar series by Carnegie Learning. We should go ahead and get started. So let me introduce our wonderful speakers. Megan Jensen, Director of Instructional Design, Literacy K-5. Megan is a former reading specialist with experience developing K-12 writing instruction and blended professional development across the United States, as well as literacy and library programming abroad. Her work upholds her belief that every student can learn and that there is transformative power in supporting students in reading and writing about their worlds. She holds a BA in English from UCLA and an MA in International and Comparative Education from Teachers College, Columbia University. And Conrad Nichols, Director of Education and Lead Game Designer. Conrad thrives at the intersection of pedagogy, play, and technology, and he is on a mission to transform math into every student's greatest ally on their learning journey. He and his team create powerful game-based learning experiences for students that are partnered with insightful analytics for teachers. Conrad holds a Master in Education from UBC with a special focus on how game design and game-based learning can democratize math education. They are both so knowledgeable and passionate about what they do, and I'm excited to learn from them today along with all of you. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Megan and Conrad.
Thanks so much, Grace. Yeah, we are very excited to share with you all today. Wanted to start off with a question, actually, and something you can put into the chat to get us all started thinking about answering the question of, I'm interested in play-based learning because. So let's take about 30 seconds right now to everyone give you a chance to think about why you're interested in play-based learning, and maybe you can enter that into the chat right now. Yeah, learning should be fun. I'd like to engage my students through informal instruction. Class is sometimes too serious, absolutely. Brain games get us to recognize and learn strategies, I love it. Links to many senses. These are all great responses. There's so much opportunity for play in the classroom in every grade. I was originally a high school specialist doing 10, 11, and 12 in science, and I used so much play-based learning in even my upper classes like that. But I wanted to actually transport you back to your childhood for a minute. Think back to the times when all you wanted to be doing was playing outside and having fun, but instead you had yard work chores to do, like pushing this lawnmower around. And these chores, well, these were ubiquitous through our youth, so much so that The Simpsons even makes a great joke about them. Wouldn't it be hilarious if there was a yard work simulator? Yard work is such a chore, and students would much rather be, or kids would much rather be playing in a yard work simulator than actually doing the real thing. What's wild about this is that here today in 2022, this is a real thing. There actually exists a lawn mowing simulator. What these designers have done is pretty hilarious. They've taken an authentic mowing experience. They advertise that you can choose from real world mowers and you can achieve the perfect mow. What these designers have really done, though, is they've tapped into the catharsis of going out and actually achieving that perfect mow and choosing the right tools for the job and organizing things just so. What's pretty incredible about this is that play is able to take something that is work and turn it into fun through that intrinsic motivation. So this old chore having to push around the mower turns into this really great, gameful, playful experience. But the tricky thing about all this is that while you might be playing this game about a yard mowing simulator, you're not actually mowing the yard at all. You're just playing a game about it. And you've tapped into these really fun, playful experiences, but you're not actually doing the thing that you're supposed to be doing in the first place. So really the big question that we want to try and answer with this webinar is, how do we turn these cognitively challenging tasks that you might see in the classroom, like this algebra question, into much more playful, meaningful, and effective learning experience for every student? So I'd like to pass it over to Megan now to take things away in this next section.
So this brings us to why we're here, why we've all gathered. We know, as Conrad has said, that play can build motivation and engagement for ourselves and our students. We also know, and we'll talk a little bit more today, about how it supports communication, creativity, problem solving skills. And the list really goes on. But the question is, what really is playful learning, and how can we more intentionally bring it into our educational settings? So that's what we'll talk about today. Here is the flow of our conversation. We'll start out with what the science of learning says about how play supports students in all grade levels and content areas. We, in this chat today, represent so many different content areas, and we really want to be thinking about how we can intentionally bring the characteristics of playful learning into our lives, into our students' lives across their school days. We'll talk about the 6 key characteristics of playful learning, and then we'll really look at some practical examples. We'll offer you a quick formative assessment tool you can use to try to see those characteristics of playful learning in the examples we present today, as well as hopefully back in your own work contexts. All right, so let's start with the research. We'll dig in first to learn a little bit about what we've learned about all this playful behavior. So first up, we know cognitive science research has identified some main success factors in learning. The first one is attention. We know this is an essential condition for successful learning because it's the filter that we use to catch and direct all the information that comes our way all day. Next one up is active engagement. As it sounds, if we want to remember new things, we can't just passively listen to them. We have to ask questions, we have to wonder, and we have to engage in some intellectual struggle. That's why, to the extent we can in a webinar setting, Conrad and I will try to get you to engage a little bit with us so you can ask and answer questions about our content today. The next success factor is feedback. Neuroscience research shows us that our brains make predictions, and then we learn when feedback tells us whether or not the predictions we have made about content are right or wrong, which is so cool and also shows us that we can't learn without making mistakes. So as long as we're making mistakes, we can learn from them as long as we get feedback to help us understand what caused them. Feedback from peers as well as from teachers is what helps us, allows us to learn from our misunderstandings. And finally, the last success factor that cognitive science tells us is essential to our learning is consolidation. Memorizing new info, acquiring new skills, that's the first step when we learn. We know we have to consolidate that knowledge, which is to say internalize it so we can use it almost unconsciously as we move forward in our lives. This is why over time, when we engage in repetition, the effort behind learning can fade and transform more into routine and free up our space in our brain to learn lots of new things. So while play, as we'll get into, supports all 4 of those key success factors for learning, it's particularly suited to do what Conrad was chatting about during the lawn mowing portion of our time today. And that is, it really helps us to build active and engaged learning. When kids are active and engaged, we set the conditions for these other success factors: attention, feedback from peers and teachers, and the opportunity to consolidate information through repeated and often hands-on practice. So we'll talk a little bit more about active engagement through thinking more about motivation.
One of the great challenges of being a teacher in a really diverse class, though, is finding out how all of your students actually do become actively engaged. They're all motivated through different means. They have different inspirations for them, things that are really drawing them to any particular class. You might have one student who loves working with their friends. And so if you can get them into group work, they will be so focused and on task. Whereas another student might like to be really creative and expressing themselves. And so if you can give them something that will help them really be more self-expressive through some manipulatives or through some art supplies, these are all great offerings for this student. Whereas another student might like seeing really high scores and showing things off to their parents at home about how well they're doing in class. Another student might really like problem solving and puzzles, and we're getting into a pretty challenging level of differentiation here where we've got all these different students who might have different motivating factors that are getting them actively engaged. Some even might like learning about the stories and interesting people, and when we're doing a math problem, maybe that isn't right there. So trying to differentiate between all of these different motivations can be really challenging, but luckily, something like play can actually encapsulate all of these motivations really, really well. There's actually a group called Quantic Foundry who has studied over 850,000 different people who play games, and they've boiled things down to just 6 different main motivations that they find across the board of why people actually play. Some of those things are seeking for a sense of action. They want adventure and fast pace. And so something like a mad minute in the classroom might be really great for a student who's seeking that kind of action. Other students might be really looking for that social connection, either maybe competition or collaboration or building community amongst each other. Others still might be looking for achievement, wanting to complete every single piece of homework and really gaining lots of power in terms of their mastery. But all of these different motivations might fall into different students. And because we work with such a diverse range of students in the classroom, we need to be thinking of different ways we can differentiate our instruction for all of these different students. And luckily, play is a great way that we can actually get to all of these different pieces of motivation that students might have.
Okay, so what is play though? We've said the word play quite a bit. We can think of play as existing along a continuum, much like the one you see on your screen. So on the far left end, we have free play. Free play is what a lot of us imagine. We imagine a kid playing outside. This is a context in which children are given the freedom to explore and discover with very minimal constraints. They are leading the way. They are making all of their own decisions about how they want to play. But play is not just something that happens in a vacuum, and it is not just something that is completely student directed. Our environments structure the play that we do. That means the materials we have available to us, as well as the people around us, can structure and influence the type of play or the playful context that we engage in. So if you move your eye from left to right on this spectrum, you'll see that play becomes more guided or structured by those elements of the environment. The term playful learning, as you'll see it across the literature and as we'll use it here, is an umbrella term that is used to include free play, that completely student-directed playful experience, as well as these more structured contexts of guided play, which still involves a good amount of student or child choice, but is sequenced or scaffolded by the adult or the educator, as well as games, which Conrad will talk to us about today, which are adult design, but do still allow elements of student autonomy and choice as well. Each of these play contexts is important and plays a role in our lives, both at and outside of school. So while today we'll focus on the 2 contexts in the middle of this spectrum of play, I do want to acknowledge that we know free play supports lots of wonderful things like linguistic development and social emotional learning, as well as cooperation, partnership. We also know direct instruction has an essential role to play in our classrooms. We, for instance, know that explicit instruction has become critical and is incredibly effective in teaching students phonics skills, the sequential and systematic skills that we know they need to apply to read successfully. So these contexts all have a role to play in the life of a student, as well as in our own lives at school and outside of school. But today we'll focus in on that middle part of the spectrum. So research offers us 6 key characteristics that are inherent in playful learning contexts. We will review those characteristics and then we'll go look at what they look like in some concrete examples from learning environments. So here's the first 3 you see on your screen. The first 2 really, they work together, and that is active learning and learning that engages students. So active learning involves students who are really focused and engaged. We can see that they are focused because they are asking lots of questions and they are offering reflections either verbally or in writing. Engaging instruction, for me, I tend to focus on the method of instruction here. We want to see that the method being used is supporting students in learning from other people, not just the teacher, but peers, and that method is supporting students in filtering out all those distractions so that they can attend to the task at hand. The third characteristic of playful learning is that it is meaningful for students. This is a learning experience in which students can make connections between the concepts or the skills that they're learning and previously learned concepts or concepts and experiences that they are learning about outside of school. The next 3 characteristics of playful learning are that the learning environment is socially interactive, iterative, and joyful. Socially interactive is quite what it sounds like. We're giving students to cooperate with one another, to talk to their peers, to make things with their peers. And what's really key about this is that it supports all the kinds of growing we do, intellectual, social, emotional, linguistic. We also want to make sure that this playful learning experience is iterative for students. That means the instruction or the educational environment gives students the opportunity to continually make guesses at, make hypotheses about what it is they are learning, and then test those hypotheses through ongoing engagement with new content, new texts, new experiments, whatever the case might be in the content area. And finally, the biggest and most exciting characteristic of playful learning that I think has brought a lot of us here is that it's joyful, that we can engage students and make them feel positive in the classroom. Joyful, this can be a pretty expansive term. Today, we're really talking about this in the context of students demonstrating positive emotions in the classroom. I do want to make a note here that joyful emotions or positive emotions can look like being really energetic, which also can look like quiet focus. So I want us to keep that in mind, because sometimes joy does mean looking at a lot of smiling, laughing, talkative young people. Other times, enthusiasm and energy looks like intense focus on the material or in the activity at hand. Okay, so we just reviewed all of these nice characteristics. What in the world do they look like in the real world? Let's get into the classroom. There are lots of ways that these can look in the classroom. There's no single right way to implement these characteristics in a formal learning environment. We know playful learning is driven by lots of student inquiry. It's meaningfully connected to students' lives, and it's focused on building experimentation and social interactions. So the big goal here is, in a playful learning context, educators and students are working together to build or co-construct knowledge. So this isn't that direct instruction where we're moving students through a really explicit scope and sequence, and we are giving them the skills or giving them the knowledge that we need them to internalize and present back to us. In this case, we're co-constructing together through experimentation, through inquiry, through projects. So that co-construction of knowledge can happen through lots of pedagogical approaches, some of which I've offered on the slide here for you to review. Project-based learning is one where students are developing knowledge by exploring real-world problems. Theme-based learning, many of us engage with. This is where we are guiding students through series of lessons and activities related to broad or overarching themes. Inquiry-based learning occurs quite a bit when we ask kids to make real-world connections through lots of high-level questioning. So there's obviously lots of overlap between these approaches. And one of the main points I want to offer today is we are actually engaging students in lots of these characteristics of playful learning already. one of the intentions of our webinar and of our time together today is for us just to bring a little bit more conscious awareness to these characteristics so that we can either see them in our classroom or build instruction that supports students in interacting with those characteristics. So we've got lots of research demonstrating the positive impacts of those pedagogical approaches on my previous slide. What's really exciting is that researchers are now examining the effects of guided play specifically. As a reminder, guided play, it's sort of on that left center section of our play spectrum. And that's that shared experience between educators and students, where the educator is providing that sequencing and scaffolding, preparing relevant materials, modeling new skills, facilitating purposeful conversation, but is also allowing students to have some agency and choice in the ways they participate, the questions they ask, the reflections they share, and so on. So a study this year out of the University of Cambridge took a look at the impact of guided play on about almost 4,000 students ages 3 through 8. So this was in an elementary school. And really promisingly, they found that a playful approach to learning can be just as effective as more traditional or teacher-led methods in developing a number of skills, including literacy, numeracy, and executive functions. What they found, as you'll see here, is that guided play has had a significantly greater positive impact on some areas of numeracy, including shape knowledge and some early math skills like verbal counting and knowing number syllables. It also better supported the development of cognitive flexibility, the ability to switch between tasks and respond to the environment by making decisions about the tasks you need to do. All right. So this all sounds nice. How do I do this? How do I see any evidence of this stuff in my classroom? Well, we want to offer you a simple formative assessment tool just to support you in leaving this webinar and looking for this stuff tomorrow in whatever your work context is. So I'll offer this tool in the chat. And Conrad, if you wouldn't mind showing the document on your screen, I'll orient everyone to it, and then we will apply it to a few examples of guided play and games. So as you can, that's perfect, Conrad, thanks. As you can see here, simple formative assessment tool. We've got our classroom look-fors on the left-hand side, and what do you know? Those are those characteristics of playful learning. We want to see, okay, are the kids being active? Are they participating through questioning and reflecting? Are they engaged? Does the method of instruction I have selected help the kids to learn from each other and to stay focused? If you'll scroll down, you'll see we can also check to see if the work is meaningful for the kids, if they are connecting the new content to previously learned or experienced content. Is it interactive? Are they cooperating with one another to complete the task? Is it iterative? Are they being given chances to take guesses or come up with hypotheses about the content and then test whether or not those guesses are accurate? And finally, on the bottom of this tool, we can check to see if this work is joyful. Are students displaying positive emotions about the task or content? Knowing we might not always see evidence of those positive emotions, it might, as I mentioned, look like intense focus. So this is a tool we invite you to use, again, in an informal way to look for evidence of playful learning, either across the school day for students if you're with them for several class periods, or throughout an assignment or project that you've got going on in your context. So for those of you that are able to open that on your screen, I invite you to have it up on your end as we take a look at the next couple of examples. All right. So many of us think about project-based learning when we hear about being playful and being creative in schools. And we know guided play absolutely can look like this. This is a brief example I wanted to offer to you from our friends at High Tech Elementary School in Southern California. And this was an ecosystem project, a long-term project for their elementary schoolers that had an overall purpose of helping the kids develop a connection to their natural world through a lot of study of ecosystems, animal adaptations, and in particular, the role of pollinators in their school garden. Projects include lots of products that the students create. The final product here was a kid's guide to your backyard ecosystem. And this included giving kids the choice about which chapters they wanted to write based on where their interests lay. And it involves students working together to organize and draft chapters and design layouts and revise together and so on. So project-based learning, and an example like this one, shows us a lot of those characteristics of playful learning. Kids are actively participating. They are asking lots of questions about the environment that they are learning within, in this case, the garden around their school. They're working together. This method of instruction it mandates that they talk to one another to complete experiments, complete field guides, and so on. They are, of course, working cooperatively in order to complete their final product. It's very iterative. They are making hypotheses about what they're going to find out in the environment, and then they're collecting information to see if those hypotheses are accurate. But guided play can also look like what you'll see up next and what we'll review together. Guided play can take place on a large long-term stage, like an ongoing project that you put together for your students. That's also a pretty time-intensive and often material-intensive endeavor. We have lots of ways we can bring these characteristics of playful learning into our schools through smaller strategies that we use on an everyday basis. I want to show you an example of one of these strategies. What we'll do is we will watch just a couple of parts of this video, about 2.5 minutes in total. As you're watching, I would like for you to share in the chat, what characteristics of playful learning do you see, and what's your evidence for those characteristics? I'll put those prompts in the chat for you, and Conrad's going to show just a couple sections of this video. For context, it's a middle school ELA classroom. They are conducting a Socratic seminar about the giver.
Everybody spells my whole name wrong. None of my name is if you just got to do I'd say why, because he literally has all my movies. Districts, the novel is banned or restricted. Do you agree or disagree on whether or not this book should be banned or restricted? What I said is, like, it depends on where you live and who you are, if it should be restricted or not. Because, like, say if it's a younger audience at a younger school, but for a school for younger people, then maybe, like, they don't need to read this book because some of its elements that it has. But if you're like an older audience and stuff like that, then maybe the book doesn't need to be banned. But I think that it just depends on where you are if the book is banned or not.
I do not think it should be banned because this really never happens. Like, it's not real. This doesn't happen around the world. So I think it should be banned.
I agree with Harrison because like it shouldn't be banned because we probably take a lot of our decisions for granted, and we should, like, when you read the book, you realize that, like, if we didn't have these choices, like, how much, like, different our lives would be. So what were you gonna say?
I feel like because there were these people that are different, and in some schools they have like people that have like disabilities or something but that are different, and so that would make them feel bad. But it does, like, the kind of like the theme of the book is that we should respect people's differences. So maybe they should read the book so that they could know that it could be different.
I think one place it would be banned would be North Korea. Because it's pretty much like the giver, the government.
Or like when you're reading something, if you're reading something and you really time out that like the character and you feel like it really seems like you, and then something bad happens to them.
The question I got is that did you like the ending of the book? Explain why or why not. I personally liked it because you got to like choose your own ending, and it's not like fixed. You can like make a brand.
Okay, a few snippets of life with our middle school friends. Thanks to those of you who are sharing in the chat. Yes, yes, yes. Great evidence for many of these characteristics of playful learning. Plenty of collaboration. The kids are talking to each other. right? They are, importantly, they're jumping in to discuss unprompted. So we can see the teacher has guided this scenario via offering the teachers discussion questions, offering the students discussion questions to consider and talk about beforehand. It's up to the kids, though, to jump in with responses to those questions, to surface new questions as they're talking. Another important note I saw is that they're making connections to life outside of school. We had the North Korea connection, which you saw got some laughter, but what that also means is the students were also making that connection for themselves between the text and experiences that are happening beyond the classroom. Something else I'll note, I don't know if it was super apparent here, but on the note of engagement as well, this is a method of instruction or a method of participation, if you want to call it that does involve helping students filter out distractions and attend to the task. Those kids in the outer circle are taking notes on the discussion while they wait their turn to be in the inner circle. So this is an example of a way that we can make decisions about some of the strategies that we use on a daily basis to enact those characteristics of playful learning. Yeah, it's not always going to look like all of us in the dirt together, smiling, laughing, but it is playful in the sense that it's getting kids engaged. They're active, they're cooperating, and they are, through these processes, absolutely enacting those big factors of successful learning from cognitive science that we talked about earlier. They're attending, they're focused, and they are, through ongoing interaction with one another, consolidating this knowledge so that it just becomes something that's in their brains and that they can use in life. So one more takeaway from the classroom setting on a note of guided play, and then we'll talk about games. And that is that we've talked about long-term projects and we've talked about short-term daily strategies. I also want to leave you with a thought about how you set the conditions for guided play through the prompts or the assignments that you give to your students. Here's an example 8th grade assignment from our ELA world, and that is write a podcast script in which you analyze how one of the unit texts portrays the causes and consequences of an incident of prejudice. In your discussion, analyze pivotal moments that reveal important information or provoke action. Now, we don't have time to do this today, but what I want to invite you to think about, either for this prompt or tomorrow, go back to your work setting and look at an assignment you are planning to have students engage with, and ask yourself, how can I design instruction that supports the kids in getting to or completing that final product through these characteristics of playful learning, through staying actively engaged, making meaningful connections, connecting their lives to the classroom content, working collaboratively with their peers, and testing and revising understandings. So we've given you a formative assessment tool. I can argue you could flip it and turn it into an instructional design and planning tool as well, in order to bring guided play to your classroom.
There we are. I lost the unmute button. We're going to dive over to the far right-hand side of this playful learning spectrum and talk about games. And here at Carnegie, we really focus in on digital games. And so that's really what is going to be the focus for this today. There's, of course, tons of great tabletop and board games and other kinds of interactive games you can do with students. But I'm just going to focus in on digital games and talk a little bit more about those. And one of the big questions is, where do you even start? The last I checked, by looking on the App Store, there's about 130,000 different educational games that are out there. There are so many things to choose from. Even knowing where to begin with this can be a little bit overwhelming. When I was a student many moons ago, I remember playing Math Blaster in the classroom. Of course, I also remember playing games like Oregon Trail. But Math Blaster is really the one that stuck out to me. In Math Blaster, you are flying in a spaceship in outer space and you're shooting junk with your lasers, and it's really fun, and you have to answer these math problems. But one of the things that really stuck out to me, even as a kid when I was playing it, was the wish that there was a little bit more blasting and a little bit less math. The math in this game was treated in such a way that you have to kind of get through it in order to get to the really fun stuff that's on the side. It was really sugar-coated. And when we think of games like this, they can often be fraught with this idea that learning becomes so inherently uninteresting itself that it needs to be sugar-coated in order to be fun. Of course, as educators, we all know that this is not the case. Learning is so inherently interesting. It is a wonderful thing. But in some cases with digital games, we need to be really cognizant of the choices we make for our students in the classroom so that we don't give them the same perception. There was a wonderful study done even way back in 1973, actually, where this researcher, Lepper, studied children who loved to draw. They were so intrinsically motivated to draw on their own. And his research question was about how their intrinsic motivation would change if he offered them some sort of extrinsic reward. And so with the control group, he didn't change anything. He let the students keep on drawing as they were previously. And then with the experimental group, he gave them a certificate, or he told them in advance that he was going to give them this certificate for completing their drawings. And so really interesting thing that happened with this is the students who were given the certificate, the amount of drawing that they did in the weeks after the experiment decreased dramatically. Their intrinsic drive to draw on their own was a little bit lessened by the fact that there was now this extrinsic carrot being dangled on the end of the stick. But I think much more sad than all of this as well is that Lepper also noticed that the quality of their drawings decreased the more and more extrinsic rewards that he gave his students. And so again, I think this is something that we as educators need to be really cognizant of when we're choosing different digital games to give to our students in the classroom. Not all digital educational games are going to be that top tier, really fantastic and educationally effective. Lots of them have lots of playful experiences in them though, and we're going to talk about some of those right now. So one of the very first characteristics of playful learning that Megan mentioned earlier is being active. And that's that students are focused and engaged in the actual learning process itself through questioning and reflecting. So when I was playing Math Blaster, was I engaged with the learning process? I was pretty engaged with shooting junk in space. That was the really fun part. And in fact, the learning process got in the way of that, and it got in the way of actually having fun and having this playful experience. So what does it look like to have an active, playful experience in a digital game? Well, how many of us are playing Wordle right now? The only way that you can engage in Wordle is through engaging with that learning process. There are no other extrinsic factors to it. It is all entirely the intrinsic engagement with that process of uncovering this mystery of what this word is. The second characteristic Megan mentioned was being engaging. This is the method of instruction supporting students in learning from others, filtering out distractions and focusing attention on the task at hand. Many digital games have lots of engaging elements in them. There's coins and things you can unlock and new costumes, and these are all engaging elements, absolutely. But I want to speak more too about how students actually engage with the content instead of those engaging bells and whistles. For a wide demographic of students, we need to have a kind of resource that is going to be widely differentiable to every single one of those students, so that all of them can engage with it in a way that's meaningful to them at their level. One of the games that my team has helped develop is called Zorbit's Math Adventure. A couple examples from this. In this activity, we're measuring length on a number line. We're playing a Zorbit on the left, and we're actually throwing a water balloon at a squid. So you need to measure that length on a number line. And this is an early entry point for students to working in measuring length in grade 1. This might be perfect for some students who are working on measuring length, but other students might be more advanced. And for them to engage with this in the same kind of meaningful outcomes, we need to give them a more advanced style problem. And so in Zorbit's Math Adventure, we built an adaptive learning system that will change the problem just slightly so that it's still based on that learning outcome, but now is engaging for a different mindset, for a different level of learning. So here on the right-hand side, we no longer see that trajectory line on screen. It's no longer really telling them the answer. They have to start working this out on their own. But we can keep on going further and making things a little bit more challenging and keep on tweaking it. For students who are even more advanced and really getting this concept, what if we moved Zorbit away from the origin and put some numbers on the number line? Now they can start doing addition and subtraction and higher order thinking strategies in order to play in this experience. And finally, for those really advanced students, what if we turn this whole concept on its head and turn that number line into a ruler that you actually have to pick up and move around screen to try and find the right position for it? This is just a single resource, but in this single resource, students can engage with this task in many, many different ways at the learning level that's right for them. The third characteristic is meaningful. Can students make connections between new concepts and personally relevant familiar information? So many digital games are use this kind of format where they will have some sort of theme, like a nice meadow theme in the background with some copy and pasted problems over top of it, like a 2 + 3 equals something with some multiple choice questions down below. And don't get me wrong, procedural fluency is incredibly important, and there's lots of great resources out there for it. And if that is the primary goal of the playful learning experience, then this might be the perfect choice for you. But to be able to actually meaningfully pull different concepts together that are much more personally relevant, we might want to look at a different style of playful experience for the students. This one on the right is called Was It Trouble? And this is actually also asking a very similar question to the one on the left, but it's doing so in a much more engaging style of way. In Was It Trouble, students really have to critically think about the situation that they find themselves in. They have to come up with strategies for how they're going to implement it. They need to execute on that strategy. They need to, and if they get things wrong, they actually have to go back and reflect and really think about why their solution wasn't right, and then come back with a different kind of solution. So all of these multiple linked representations that students are seeing on the right-hand side is really serving to reinforce the learning, but also to really build on that playful experience for students. This same kind of dichotomy of games where we see these abstracted questions on the left and these much more applied questions on the right also goes hand in hand with socially interactive games. In socially interactive games, we see a cooperative play with peers supporting the cognitive, social, emotional, and linguistic growth between students. And so here's an example on the left-hand side. This is, again, a multiple choice question that's asking about equivalent fractions. I've got some manipulatives that I can work with to help me out, but in the end, I just need to choose which one of these 4 different fish is the right answer. And you can imagine a student who is struggling with this question, and if he turns to his peers and he asks them, hey, how do I finish this problem? What do I have to do here? The answer to that is just going to be one of the 4 answers along the bottom. The kind of conversation that is going to be happening between students, the social interactions, are really just going to be about what the solution is to the problem and not what the problem is itself. Other kinds of playful digital experiences, though, take things a little bit further, and they really, again, bake in all of these different mathematical concepts into the game world itself. This is an example called slice fractions, where I'm still being asked about equivalent fractions, but this time I'm doing it with blocks of lava and this ice block in the middle. And I have to choose the exact right amount from this block of lava on the left and the block of lava on the right. There's actually lots of different solutions for this single problem. And so if that same student turned to their friend and said, hey, how do I solve this question? The answers that you're going to get between them are going to be very, very different than what you'd have on the left. The kinds of conversation is going to be much more about critical thinking and strategy and about execution. They'll want to know why that's the right answer instead of just knowing what the actual answer is. There's a study done about this by Murray, Mokros, and Rubin that looked at exactly at this, the level of cognitive discourse between students in multiple choice style problems versus much more applied problems like on the right. The 5th characteristic is iterative. Students generate, test, and revise hypotheses while interacting with their environment based on data. Is there any other greater celebration of an iterative process than the scientific method? It is exactly that. It is an iterative process where we keep on asking these questions and hypothesizing and experimenting and drawing conclusions. So I'll let you into a sneak peek of what a grade 8 science class looked like for me when I was a teacher. And we pulled out Minecraft because, of course, all of my students were madly addicted to Minecraft. They really wanted to know how these redstone circuits worked in the game. Redstone circuits, if you don't know, you can use them to build these simple electronic circuits in the game, but they are an incredibly complex system within the actual game world itself. They wanted to know how to do it. And so we pulled out the scientific method and went through this iterative process of experimentation, of hypotheses, of drawing conclusion, and then challenging those conclusions to try and figure out if we could come up with the answer to how this system works. It was an incredibly playful experience that involved so much social collaboration between peers and of students getting their hands dirty in Minecraft and trying out things that worked and didn't work and everything else. And the final 6th characteristic is joyful. And again, this is, there's no greater joy, I think, than being an educator and seeing a fully engaged classroom of students who are really focused and in the zone. And sometimes that means there's exuberance and loud noises, and other times it means it's dead quiet because everyone is right there. But joyful, put by Carol Dweck, Love challenges, be intrigued by mistakes, enjoy the effort, and keep on learning. Joyful doesn't always mean that you do everything perfect the first time. When you burn down your house in Minecraft, again, as you are probably want to do at some point, students don't put it down and stop right there. They pick things back up and come up with a better solution next time that's going to prevent that from happening. And maybe the joy that you get as well is going to be that authentic learning experience. But whatever that joyful is, the joyful component is, that positive affect really boosts their creativity and lends to such a positive classroom atmosphere.
Alas, our time is drawing to a close. So we've had such fun talking to you. Here is just a quick recap of what we discussed. And I'd like to ask you to leave us with some of your takeaways. After this, we'll offer you a few resources you can continue exploring. But first up, here's what we chatted about today. We started with the science of learning, what cognitive science says about how we learn, and also what it says about how play supports us in learning and our students in learning across all grades and content areas. We reviewed those 6 key characteristics of playful learning. Those are available to you in that formative assessment tool. And we also applied them to looking at examples of guided play in the classroom, as well as examples of game-based play. And that's what we're leaving behind for you, is that formative assessment tool, as well as these examples that you can return to. I wanted to note that we have offered lots and lots of cited sources in the notes section of our slides. So we will share our slide deck alongside the link to the recording for this webinar with you. Please feel free to head back into the slides, look at those examples, as well as read through the cited research in the notes section if you're looking for anything in particular. So we're going to move on to share some resources with you. Before we do, if you can hop back one, thank you. I want to ask you to tell me in the chat one word or phrase that describes what you're feeling or thinking about as you leave this webinar. Think on that, offer it in the chat, and Conrad will take us into the resources slide. Okay, so one more fun area of these slides for you as you're heading out. I want to make sure you're aware of our resources slide. These are just some fun websites and books. If you're really interested in thinking more about designing your own game-based learning or bringing play not only into your learning environments with your students, but into your life overall, we offer these resources for you to check out.
All right. Thank you so much, Megan and Conrad. That was such an amazing discussion. My brain feels so full. I couldn't think of one word because it's just so full of so many great insights. I'm going to have to chew on it for a while. We have just about 5 minutes left for questions to wrap things up. So please submit any questions that you have into the chat, and we'll have a few moments to talk through any of those questions. And know that after this webinar, if you think of things, we are going to give you the link to the feedback form. You have Megan and Conrad's email addresses here, as well as webinars. We can route you. If you don't have their email addresses, we can get you in touch with them if you have questions. Oh, I do see one question. Oh, the list of digital games from Mr. Nichols.
Hey, great question. Maybe one thing I'll do is actually I'll add a slide into this slide deck with a list of resources. So we've got this list of offline resources. Maybe I'll make another slide here with some list of recommended digital resources that you could try out as well.
Wonderful. All right. Know that if you do come up with questions after this, you can definitely come back to us with it, and we will address it in the follow-up emails let's go ahead and move on. If you loved this webinar and want to hear more on this topic, Megan is actually going to be facilitating a session on playful learning this summer at a professional learning event for literacy educators. So if you teach reading and literacy, we invite you to join us in July at Literacy for All, the National Institute. I'm going to paste the link in the chat if you'd like to learn more. I'm also going to put in the chat the link to 2 different forms. The first one is a link to the feedback survey. So please take a moment to tell us how we did, how we can do better. We really do value this feedback. We take it to heart. Your comments go a long way to help us understand what you're looking for, what's going to be helpful for you, and it really helps us shape this webinar series into something that's going to make a big difference in your classroom. So please take a moment, fill it out. The second link is to request a certificate of attendance. So fill this out. We will confirm your attendance and email you a certificate. If you can't open it right now, there's no worries. Both of these links are going to be in the follow-up email as well as the recording. All right, I think that's it. Oh, can we switch to the next slide as well? Sorry, thank you. We will be back in the fall, so please keep an eye on your inbox. Keep an eye on the Carnegie Learning website for sneak peeks for the next couple of webinars in the series. Thank you so much for coming.